Okay, so welcome everyone. We have a nice, pretty big group here, including some people who I haven't met before. Just so as a means of introduction, welcome to our IIIF community call. We have these calls every month on the second Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And we use these calls as an opportunity to bring the IIIF community together to talk about potential changes to the standards, to talk about new implementations, to demo exciting things that are going on. So we typically start these with some brief announcements, and we have just one, but it's a big one, and that is to welcome Martin Kalfatovic as our new managing director. So I will let Martin say a brief introduction before we get started.
So thank you for coming today. Today is my third day officially on board at IIIF. Many of you are familiar faces from the Los Angeles meeting, and I look forward to meeting more of you over time, either online or in person. I'm going to be attending all the different community meetings, as many as possible in as short a time as possible. So I'm looking forward to seeing all the different overlaps amongst all the groups. So again, thanks again for all the work you've been doing on behalf of IIIF, and I'll turn it back to Caitlin for the agenda.
Okay, so there recently has been some discussion happening about the future of how we will treat collections in the Presentation API in version 4.0. So we've dedicated today to have a community discussion about that. So what I'm going to do is first I'll turn it over to Rob Sanderson and Jeff Mixter, who are two of the IIIF editors. And just as a logistical note here, I suspect that we're going to have a lot of conversation today, so feel free during a Q&A or discussion session to unmute and just start talking. If you don't want to do that, you can post your questions in the chat, and I will do my very best to manage those and make sure that people get their questions answered. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob and Jeff.
Thank you all. Jeff, shall I just run through some of the things we talked about? Yeah. All right. So to look at what we have at the moment for collections, and then we can look sort of back at previous versions to see what we used to have and how they were different, and where we see paging and sets of things generally in IIIF as a way to think about how we can be more consistent across APIs in the sort of the ecosystem, while still meeting all of the use cases. So to me, at least as an editor, that's kind of the goal, that we should have consistent patterns that we can point to and say, yeah, when we have lots of things in a list, it's always the same pattern. It's always the same technique that we use. Whereas at the moment, it's not, right? The collections in the Presentation API 3.0 are quite different from other long lists of things. So let me just briefly share my screen and try to get folks up to speed. So in the Presentation API at the moment, we say collections can be used to list manifests for viewing with a predefined set of manifests, such as search results or visualized lists or hierarchies, and so on. So we just have currently a single list of items of manifests or collections. So you can sort of nest collections within collections, which could be used to get sort of a long list of pages, but you'd need to have each chunk of the collection called out as its own collection, which works if you've got a pre-described set, right? Which was sort of the use case that we had in mind for 3.0. That's okay, maybe it's books A through B, books C to D, books E to F, and so on, and you can give them meaningful names for the sub-collections. But if it's just a list of search results, then they're in probably some totally arbitrary order, and there's no useful way to an end user to divide them up into chunks. It'd just be page 1, page 2, page 3, and you'd need to know all of the pages in advance to list them at the top level collection. However, in 2.0 and 2.1, for collections, we had a paging mechanism in which you could have a collection with 9.3 million objects in it in this case, and you didn't have to list all 9.3 million things. You didn't have to divide them up into sub collections. Instead, you could have pages, and you just could say, well, the first page of this is C1, and here's C1. It's got we had manifests for other items, and it's got a next page of page 2, a next page of page 3, a next page of page 4, and so on. So this paging pattern is a pattern that we use in IIIF APIs already. So for example, in the Discovery API, we have collections of pages because there are many, many, many changes that we want to be able to list, because it is all of the updates to all of the manifests that a particular institution publishes. So this could be exceptionally long. In fact, the easy activity streams for their vocabularies is some 7.5 million entries over 4 years since they've been publishing it. At Yale, in Lux, we have 41 million records. So this, you would certainly not want to put them into an unpaged system. So we use it in modern APIs. We also use it in the search API, which is searching for annotations. And in the underlying web annotation model, there is an annotation collection and an annotation page, which follows the same pattern. The pattern itself comes from the activity streams specification in the W3C. It is section 4.6 under collections. And we have just adopted this, initially due to its adoption in the web annotation data model, but also more generally for other sorts of paging mechanisms. So activity streams is used as the underlying spec for Mastodon and all of the sort of decentralized social networking systems. So it is well supported and well implemented. So yeah, there's a collection and an ordered collection. You can have paging. It's got the terms and so on. But this is exactly what we do at IIIF. So the issue that we had in 2.1 for why we went away from this is that inconsistency with when there is sometimes pages, like in this one, and sometimes no pages, like in the current collections. So if you've only got a collection of 3 things, that's here are the 3 books of the Lord of the Rings. You don't want to have a collection with a page, and the page only has 3 items. That would take an awful lot of bandwidth and processing, and it's totally unnecessary when we could just do what we currently do, which is just list them. So in thinking about this, there's 2 possible routes. As editors, I think I'll let Jeff speak too, but I think we think that there is a good solution and a possible solution. The possible solution first is to use pages essentially always and say, well, here is the first page of the collection, and if you want more of it, then go to the next page, and if you want to see all of the collection, go up. So this would follow the pattern we have in presentation 3 for annotation pages. Okay. So you can go from the annotation page to its collection, as opposed to embedding the collection and then following to the pages. So it's certainly would be consistent in that way, but it makes it a little bit weird to say that this is a collection page, but the collection doesn't have any information in it. So the other option, go back to discovery, is to have, sorry, actually, let me show you in the underlying. So in the underlying model, which is the activity streams collections can themselves have items. And so this is the pattern that we use in 3.0 to say there is a collection, it's got some items, they're manifests. And then, yeah. So we could go this route and say that you have two different styles of collections. One is this one, where you can keep doing exactly what you do in 3. You have a collection with items, which are manifests or other collections. But if you need to use pages, then you can also do that, not by embedding the page, but by referring to it, in the same way that we do in the change discovery API. So essentially, allow first and last onto collection to refer to the first and last pages, and also allow items when the list of items in the collection isn't so long that you would want to split it up into pages. So that would, yeah. So the first one again is this one, just embed it like we do in 3.0. The second one is much closer to the discovery API, where the collection itself is very small, right? It's got lots of things in it, and you link to the first page and the last page, and then from there you traverse following page after page after page. All right, that is me. Jeff, do you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about the implications of those two recommendations, right? That first one that Rob went over is more consistent, so there's less of a burden on clients to reuse it. But it is a little, well, in my opinion, it's a little odd. I don't know, I don't want to speak for Rob, but it just seems a little more verbose, but more consistent for client reuse. Whereas the second pattern would require the client to understand, if I'm on a collection, I need to check if there are items in this collection. And if there aren't, hope that there is a first and or last page, and then know how to process it, right? So the onus now is on the client or the user of the manifest to understand how to process it. And then the other thing about the second option, which is more of an editorial thing, less sort of ideally less impact on clients, would be the documentation being very clear about if there are orders involved, like if it's like the first book, second book, that we really well document is the last page. Do you read from the last page backwards? Do you read from the first page down? Because in the discovery API, it starts the last page and move your way to the present. And I'm guessing for this pattern, it would be the exact opposite of that. You more intuitively go to the first page to find, you know, the first 5 books of the series, and the second page to find the second 5 books of the series. Again, that's more just a documentation editorial concern. You know, I think the most important aspect from a discussion perspective is what I consider less intuitive but more uniform pattern versus again, what I would consider a little bit more straightforward, more consistent with other APIs, i.e. the discovery API, but puts a little bit more burden on the reuse of the data by the client.
Yeah, sorry, one thing that's that Jeff mentioned, and I do want to call out specifically, is for 4.0, we hope, well, until now, we haven't had to introduce any breaking changes. It's really a big addition of all of 3D. If we go the option 1 of having the collection with items, then that's backwards compatible, right? Because that's what we do today. So that would be an addition to allow the pages to be added. But yeah, it's not the same as the discovery API. It's not the same as the search API, in that you can do it either way, right? So, which is a kind of an anti-pattern in APIs, right? So there should be one way to do things, but at what cost, which is why we thought, this isn't something that we need a full technical specification group to talk through, but it's certainly not something that we editors could make a decision on by ourselves. And hence we asked for this discussion. Thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, use cases, etc.
So one question from the chat is, does the new model, so I guess option B, have any effect on collections containing collections, as in newspapers or archives?
No, either way, the things which can go into the collections will be either collections or manifests. That's still fine. So yeah, the collections can have items which are collections, regardless of whether they're paged or not. Yeah, so that shouldn't have any effect.
I'll raise my hand. With both models, would there be any new types? It seems like with the change discovery-ish model, there might be an ordered collection type rather than a collection, if you had collection as items versus collection with the following the activity streams. Yeah.
So that's a good question. At the moment, I think what we would do is use the JSON-LD context to say that IIIF collection is really just activity streams ordered collection and make everything ordered by default to avoid having to create a new ordered collection versus collection. If you then did want to have a collection that was unordered, we do have the behavior unordered, which normally you would apply to manifest to say this is just a big old pile of stuff. But we can say that's also possible for collections to be explicit, that it doesn't matter which order you display these things in, it's just a set rather than a list. There would be a new type though, which would be collection page, which we would of course introduce directly out of activity streams / change discovery into the presentation API. Yeah, for being the thing which the first and last points to.
Yeah, so maybe also just, I think just to add some commentary, I think actually in that scenario, we'd actually be decreasing the number of classes that we maintain within the within the IIIF realm of modeling, because we'd in essence be adopting in structure and in sort of in principle the activity streams order collection class.
So yeah, we would add one by inclusion into the presentation API, but we wouldn't be we wouldn't be minting a new class.
Another question, I guess. So because IIIF tries to like reuse properties such as, and methods, we're trying to do that here, right? Adopting change discovery activity streams in the same way. What is stopping this from also being used for manifests where there's a large amount of canvases? Like other than obviously that's maybe a different conversation, but like would like going this direction potentially allow for that as well in the long term?
Yes. In that case, so we should discuss use cases. IIIF is use case first, but assuming that there are strong use cases for allowing paged manifests as well as paged collections, that would be a huge breaking change if we required the pages. Because then the manifest would just be a pointer to the first page, rather than having its own items. So in that case, that would make me for sort of all levels of backwards compatibility be much more in favor of the two, option one, the kind of the bifurcating one, where either you've got items or you've got first, and either is fine. Existing clients will deal with the items embedded, and newer clients will deal with either. And that could be a good transition sort of from 4.0 to a future one where we really make which could be 4.1, excuse me, where we do paged manifests for real rather than just as a sort of experiment. Oh, Kristen, muted.
Sorry. Can I just ask, is with the second scenario, am I right in thinking it would still support a model where if you did have a simple collection, then everything could be provided all in effectively in line in one group, in one file to represent one collection? Or does it imply that everything in a way must be multiple different pages that are returned from the server for individual, you know, if I had I guess what I'm getting at is just see whether there's any impact on small collections for either of these models. Like, is there anything that would make it easier or harder if I did just have a personal collection of 5 objects, or a personal collection of 10 objects, but that are nested into 2 categories, for example? Is there anything that would make that use case harder or easier with either scenario?
Yeah. So I think the small set is easier with the bifurcating scenario. It can either be items or it can have pages. The way that we would do it for small collections in the paged one, I think, just for discussion, but I imagine we would require that instead of it being in a collection, it would go into a collection page. So you retrieve the collection page as the thing that you pointed to, and it would have its items, and it would be part of the collection. So you'd still have two things. You'd have the collection page and the collection, which then the collection page points to the items. But perhaps we could get it such that the collection page has all of the information that the client really needs, and that the collection, you go up to the collection to find any other pages if you don't want to just follow next. But then it becomes a little bit more inconsistent again, right? Because things like labels and statements and metadata and rights and provider and all the IIIF added properties, the metadata, I would expect those to go onto the collection, because the pages should be just an artifact of the API. Whereas for the small collections, you'd kind of want them on the page because it sort of is a proxy for the whole collection. And yeah, now it gets a bit confusing as to where to put those properties.
Yeah, I think another way to look at that was basically if you have a very small collection of 5 items in that sort of collection page, you'd have to create an artificial collection, which really serves no purpose except to point to that one page which has the 5 things in the list. So again, more consistent, but a little odd from a modeling perspective, or maybe an unnecessary level of abstraction.
It seems like it's consistency for the sake of being consistent rather than for usability.
But again, just to compare that with the second idea, the bifurcated one, in that scenario, the client gets a manifest that gets something that has a collection there. You'd have to know, is there an items here? If so, I should process it. And is there maybe another page, your next page, or is there just a first page, last page type of situation? So while the modeling, the data might look a little bit more straightforward, there's client-side burden to processing in a potentially inconsistent collection object.
Yeah, I guess on that one, I mean, first of all, a bit of a caveat. I wouldn't say I have fully understood the differences, but my feeling is that one of, in a way, client-side burden, I think, is an important scenario, and in a way, my gut feeling would be something where almost having two models, and it's a bit like, okay, if I'm a client and I find this thing, a collection, I know exactly what to do with it. But if I find another thing that's a page collection, sure, I know that's going to be an entirely different way of handling it, and it could even be, say, an optional thing in the spec of clients should support large paged collections, but it's not necessary, because it feels like, again, with this, I think it is important that we come up with a model to support these large collections, and there's definitely use cases for that. But they feel more like the clients at that point would be more like harvesters and renderers and so on, rather than simple viewers. Like the simple viewers can and in a way and should continue to support simple collection interfaces. A hierarchy, a small number of items in a list, a small number of items in a hierarchy, and the easier we could make it for them, then the better. But again, in terms of which of the two options, or even if that doesn't apply to either, I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, from a client implementation viewpoint, I would also think consistency would be better, because with the items thing would be, maybe it's easier for an older client to just take it and say, well, it's the same as with the older collections and items. But if my collection has 3 million things in it, I'm not going to put them into items, or else the browser will crash, and therefore there is no items, and the client still needs to somehow deal with that, or break gracefully, or do whatever. And I think if you have to build in that additional mechanism, then you can go through the burden of implementing the paging in the first place and be done with it, I would say. Because am I understanding that right? That I could, for small case, also just have one fixed collection page, which has the 5 items, and no second page, no next. That's valid, right?
You would still need to have the collection.
Yeah, the collection, sure. But in the collection, I just need
page is totally fine.
first, so I could, because another thing would be on the server, because then I could, just inline it in one manifest, collection manifest, and have that static, because for the other paging stuff, I would at least need additional endpoints, or I could regenerate all that stuff or whatever, but it needs an additional call for another endpoint to go to the next page, and I need to implement that. Whereas if I just have 10 things or 100 things, I could put them in the one generator that outputs the collection with the one collection page, and no next endpoint really implemented. But that would be valid, right?
Yes and no. So the model would support that, because the model kind of doesn't say anything about the API, right? In the abstract, you could embed then all of the manifests into the page, into the collection, and just have one representation with everything. But the way that the APIs have divided up the representations, where do you draw the boundary in the JSON? The collections have always been separate from the pages. Right? There are different responses from the server. So, for example, the annotation page we do embed into the manifest, but it refers up part of to the annotation collection. The activity streams page refers to the collection, which is a separate representation. The same with search. So we would be gaining some consistency at the expense of other consistency if we were to embed the page within the collection. So yeah, this is what, there are lots of axes. There's lots of possible ways, none of which are the obvious single correct solution. It's who are we optimizing for? Is it optimized for the existing data, or is it optimized for clients, or what? Tristan, go ahead.
Yeah, one other thought I've had, again, your point about breaking changes. What I would wonder, and again, I don't know how feasible this is with either of the two models, or it's the third way still, is whether, what I really like about the Presentation API 3 version is that it is simple and it can be standalone. And what I would wonder is, would there be any value in doing something like saying, okay, collection stays exactly the same, but we introduce a new type called large collection or paginated collection or multi-collection or something. And that then, it's not a breaking change, it's an addition to API 4. And that is the thing that then allows for pagination and kind of almost starts to put this requirement on the client to say, yeah, to truly service this, you have to be prepared to do multiple requests and retrieve data and then check something and then retrieve something else and do a flurry of things, versus what we have at the moment, which is the simpler case.
Yep. No, that would be possible too, for sure. I think the question then would be, is it clearer to have a separate paged collection class that only has pages and never has items? Or is the fact that it has items or first and last, is that sufficient to not bother minting this new class for paged collections versus collections? Yeah, what's the breakingness? I guess what's the impact on the client, on the usability for the option? But yes, no, you're right. That's another option. We could certainly give that route and have a paged collection as essentially a subtype from collection, which doesn't have items, it has first and last and so on. David.
From what you just said, I feel like that's what follows the activity stream model. I mean, 4.6 has collection that is unpaged, and then page collection is a subtype, which in that context, if we implement this as it stands wholesale, what we're doing is adding collection pages as a subtype, as another class. But everybody that is running with the current collection model, clients should still respect that and keep running with that. Am I mistaken? Like, that's how I'm reading this spec. 4.6 would still be true, but we would have collection pages as another model, and a client should respect collection pages. But in the event that they don't, it's gonna fail gracefully on 4, right? Like in a very large collection. But if someone had a small collection, they would just implement it as 4.6 collection, right, with 5 items. And they wouldn't actually have to change anything. It would be exactly the same as now.
Yeah. So yeah, in 4.6.1 in activity streams, and we can just drop that link into the chat for folks. So there isn't specifically a paged collection type from activity streams natively. Any collection can be paged. So it's figure 20 has little subclasses and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, collection pages are just part of generic collection, but collection can have items. And then the ordering is the separate classes. So essentially what we'd be doing would be minting a new name for collection, and it's as a hint to the client to say, this page collection has pages, but it's still in the underlying ontology just an activity streams collection. So yeah, it's I don't think that I don't think we'll be, regardless of which option we go, we'll be fine with the underlying spec. We don't need to worry too much about conformance to the activity streams spec, because all of the options that we've talked about are totally fine with it.
Yeah, I think that sort of follows up on that question that Matt asked in the chat with the activity streams. It is possible to have both paged or inline or whatever, just items there. But again, then if you have just 5, you have an anti-pattern in that I could just add them inline in the collection, or I could have a first page, which takes me to an order collection, which has then in itself just like 5 items in it. So again, the burden's on the client to understand how to process that data.
And then
so yeah,
the question with both items and pages simultaneously is which is the right order. So yeah, I would be nervous about having a collection which has items and which has first and or last. Yeah, because you would quickly end up with ambiguity if someone put, here are my 5 highlights of the collection, but the collection's actually ordered via alphabetically. So yeah, then in that case, what does the client do in terms of which order to use to display them?
Yeah, I mean, I guess then both should be equivalent as far as you can make it. But yeah, then you would have the 5 items duplicated, both in items and in collection inline, page collection as inline items. Yeah, not so nice. Yeah.
So while we have a brief pause, I just want to make sure that we're looping in everything from the chat. Would the activity stream model also introduce total terms? The answer to that is yes. And then there's another question here, or rather a statement, that in a practical sense, with the ordered collection, one could compare the first-last page IDs to determine if pagination is actually necessary. I'm going to put a link. This is from Getty in the notes.
It seems to me to throw something on the table and see what folks think. I think my preference after the discussion so far is to go with Tristan's option 3 of making a new paged collection sort of alias, which has first and last and doesn't have items, and then leave items alone. Leave collection alone. So collection is just the same as in 3. It has items and only has items. Then we're still backwards compatible completely with 3. We're adding something on top, right? If you don't understand what page collection is, then you don't process it, and well, that's fine. If you do understand it, then you know which way you know what to do. It also doesn't end up with the sort of the inconsistency of having either items or first and last. And then what happens if you have both, and so on and so on. The validation for it is pretty straightforward. We wouldn't have the problem of having to embed pages within collections, which we don't do in any of the others, because in that case, you just use the existing 3.0 version. But it's really easy to detect that this is new, and clients that 3.0 clients that were given a 4.0 manifest or a 4.0 audit a page collection would probably just break, right? They would say, oh, I don't know what this page collection thing is. Put up my hands, stop. Whereas if they were given a collection that had first and last, but no items, that seems more likely that they would just, try to process it like a real collection in 3.0 and not find items and display nothing. but it would then look like it was doing the right thing. So yeah, it seems consistent with the others. It gives us the paging functionality while still being backwards compatible, and with some, hopefully some tricks that the 3.0 clients wouldn't fall apart. Wouldn't fall apart completely.
So then in that situation, Rob, the new page collection class could not be equivalent or could not be the activity streams collection. It would have to be a wholly new class, because in the context of activity streams, a collection that we're calling a page collection could have items in it, because you're allowed to do that in activity streams.
Well, yes. So
I
depends on whether we
say
treat-
that only because it would have to be some sort of very clear editorial note saying you're not
Yeah.
allowed to do that.
So it depends on whether we're treating the context as as kind of a pointer to the ontology that defines the model, or just as a nice to have for folks who deal with RDF. And in IIIF, typically we treat it the latter. It's like, okay, if you've got RDF, if you've got a triple store and a graph, yeah, this is actually really is a graph. You can do stuff with it as a graph. But what would happen if we defined both page collection as activity streams collection and collection, IIIF collection as activity streams collection? When you came to compact the triples using just the context, it would make an arbitrary choice as to which it was, because it doesn't know the rule that we're applying on top of it to say page collections must have first and last and must not have items, and collections must not, are the opposite. So the compaction algorithm would fall apart. So at which point probably we would want to say we're having a new IIIF class page collection, which is a subclass of activity streams collection. But
Activity streams order collection.
Yeah. But
Yeah, and so I mean,
the impact on is pretty low if we didn't do that, because it would only be in terms of compaction that would break things.
yeah, no, that makes sense. I think the other question would just be, it would be somewhat odd, because then we would have the change discovery ordered collection class, which is the equivalent or whatever, is the same as the activity streams ordered collection class, which you can have items directly embedded in. And then we would have the page collection in Prezi 4, which would be the same as the ordered collection class, but in the spec we'd say you can't have items here.
Yep.
So again, I guess from a processing, it's still easier from I'm just processing saying this is a JSON document perspective, but it just, the modeling, it's kind of odd, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess we could also consider in a change discovery 2.0 to reconcile again for consistency. That said, the collection in the presentation API has a fundamentally different use case and processing from the collections and change discovery, right? So a sequence of activities in chronological order as opposed to a list of manifests and subcollections. So I think I'm more okay with it being yes, having the same underlying class, but with because of the different processing, having a different equivalent AAA class. Anyone else? Any other thoughts or concerns or comments or interesting use cases that might cause problems?
My worry with retaining collection with items and keeping that the same and going with this paged collection, or however we want to call it, type, it's sort of institutions are going to have to like make a choice or go both somehow, and then maybe their manifest can be part of both. And I think that complication, people are going to lean towards the simplicity of the collection, which maybe they should. And I do worry about adoption of page collections, and maybe it'll be the same as it is with the complexity of annotations, where there's all these different ways to handle annotations. You keep them in your manifest, you can put them on canvases, you could put them in annotation collections, annotation pages, wherever. Maybe it'll just be that, and it'll just take time. But my worry is that work will be done to build in page collections, and then there will be little viewer adoption of it. But maybe that's just the way IIIF is.
Yes, I mean there's stuff from 3.0 that isn't implemented in major viewers, so it's quite possible that we wouldn't see as much adoption as we might. I think from the publishing perspective, though, the publishing institutions still have to make a choice either way. Is this pages or is it a single list of items? If it's a collection with items or if it's a collection with pages, some bit of code or some person needs to make that choice somewhere. So yeah, I'm not sure that there's a way to avoid that. It could be, we could try to sort of mandate it and say if your collection is greater than some reasonably high number, then you must use pages. But then there could equally be times when you want to have a much smaller number and still use pages. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend going that route, but certainly could be considered.
Yeah, you could also have a situation where the adoption of page collections might not happen, just because you can in essence do page collections with the existing collection, because you have a collection that has items that in the items are collections themselves, that then have the items per collect, whatever. In essence, you'd have a collection that represents what would be a page in the page collection modeling paradigm.
The UI will be better if you do adopt the new form, though.
I was wondering how do clients handle that?
Probably poorly would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, you could at least add little stuff to your intermediate collection, saying A to B1 and then B to. Yeah, I mean, I would say I would be fine with, I mean, as you said, Rob, with saying, well, if everybody is happy with putting lots of stuff in the items for their collections and they never adopt page collections because they don't have to for technical reasons, I think then I would be fine with that.
And what I would add is that I agree that there's, adding a new way of doing it may hinder adoption, but in a way, it feels like it's better that there's that way of doing it with an interface that's sort of explicitly designed for large number of things and of retrieving in a paginated way, rather than the current 3.0 version that just feels a bit nasty of like, oh, I'll give you the first page, then I'll nest a collection that is the second page, and they'll nest within that a collection that's third page, and so on, which again, firstly, I don't know how widely adopted that is. I suspect not very much. But yeah, I think it definitely feels nicer to have something that is explicitly designed for the idea of retrieving an arbitrary number of, an arbitrary and potentially large number via a series of requests, rather than the current one that where there is no idea of, I have no idea what the total number I'll get from this is as a client until I keep chaining together more and more and more, or read the language embedded in the label. So if it feels like it definitely needs a switch to a paginated model, but it's working out the best way to do that to balance the needs of both break and change. But I would argue more importantly, you know, simplicity of clients knowing what they're dealing with, which I don't think we have in the 3.0 situation.
Yeah, the other feels a bit like those annoying, endlessly scrolling websites where you never know if you're looking at the end of the list, because the end certainly sees as being the end of the list and there's more. Yep.
And is there, in a way, is there an analogy with kind of the way that annotation pages are treated? In that, again, you can, you know, the generating institution can choose to either, you know, stick those in line, or they can start to put them into separate files. And my guess is that there will be a similar sort of logic as to an institution saying, oh yeah, should we go for the simple and existing case of a, you know, an embedded and possibly nested collection, or a paged collection?
Yep. Yeah, agreed. There is yeah, definitely similarities, not identical, but yeah, it's the same sort of concept. We don't know how many annotations there are. There are some that you need to have really quickly, and then there's others that you can delay access to. Matt asks in the chat, though feel free to ask it in words. Is there a way to direct a viewer to fall back from a page collection to a regular sort of collection? We don't really have that notion in IIIF anywhere else that I can think of. You know, sort of if you don't understand this, then go look at that, or you know, here is a simpler version of this. Maybe in auth, I guess there's some sort of fallback tricks, but it's more at the API level than at the descriptive level. Worth considering, particularly sort of transition phase of you know, if the viewer doesn't want to implement the pages but wants to have something to use, there may be some, you know, if there was a way to refer to a simpler version, and that could be useful for other aspects of IIIF as well, right? Here is the really complex 3D scene with all of the lights and cameras and etc. etc. Well, all right, but I'm just a 3.0 client which doesn't have 3D. Can I just show an image and it won't have all the functionality, but can I fall back to something simpler? You know, that could be beneficial. It manifests as well, right, as well as the collections. So yeah, I'll make an issue that we should discuss, and we should discuss that. We have 5 minutes left, noting the time. So how would we, what are the next steps? How would we like to move forwards on this? I would suggest that editors go off and write up kind of a draft spec separate from 3 and from 4, just saying, you know, here is the addition that we want to add into 4, and then bring it back to the community to talk through and discuss. Or if everyone's happy, you know, we can take it straight to the TSG for approval there. But yeah, having something to read through, I think, would be the next step. How does that sound to folks? Nodding from folks, thumbs up. Yep.
From a communication standpoint, once we have a draft spec, I can send that out in the newsletter. So the editors and I can talk about what the potential timing is for that. And if this was useful, which it seems like it was, we had a great turnout for this call, we could certainly devote another community call to further discussion.
Or not to put words into Caitlin and Martin's mouths, but if there are other more technical topics, you know, feel free to send them, you know, Slack or the email list, or Caitlin and Martin or others. You know, as a community, we want to make sure that the technical side is as strong as the social side, and we are one community that develops a few specifications that's implemented in many implementations that serves a huge amount of content. So if we screw up the APIs, if we screw up the specifications, there's a lot of downstream effect. If we screw up the community, well, that's a whole different level of disaster. But yeah, we absolutely want to make sure that everything that we publish, particularly given the rate that we have new major versions, it needs to be right, because we don't get second chances on these things, at least for sort of 4 or 5 years. So yeah, we want to make sure that everything that gets put into a spec that gets published is as good as it can possibly be, which means lots of eyes and discussion and so on.
Okay, thank you all. Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Jeff, for leading this discussion. And like we said, we have these meetings every month. So the next one will be, let me tell you, August 14th, topic TBD. So stay tuned, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye.